There will be a microphone with you. But let me start from the beginning of the day, when we talked about the huge demand for a number of different services and interest levels that were high, but also that consumers were foreseeing some kind of general availability of services that would help them in their everyday life. That's a very interesting starting point if you think about it, right, Mikael?
Absolutely, yes. And of course, I mean, it goes back to this. And so we started from looking at demand into how that will change society. But I think my takeaway from the day is that, you know, well, you can start from demand and look at how that will cause change. Mm-hmm. Or you can start, I think, as many of the other speakers here from the House Vision Project, also from Professor Vasila, is starting from change. Mm. And how that actually causes demand. So of course, there's you know, what's first, the egg or the chicken or the egg? Yeah. But we are all aware that there's a lot of change happening. And in all of this, then we start thinking about how should we adapt to this? What are the most important adaptations? If it's ICT services, if it's living conditions, and so on and so forth. So demand and change. They come together from both sides.
And I think it's based from the human beings see that there is a need for change too. I mean, we are rapidly coming into a situation with the ongoing urbanization that will require new types of solutions. And it's also driven from a lot of structural changes. And we heard a lot from the Japanese example of how we have an aging population, we have the density, we have the need to create a new way of living, right? Which also forces change to happen. But then we were also discussing how can we learn from each other? I mean, that's sort of the basic underlying thing from this day, to open up a discussion a little bit and see what could be taken from one city or one country and adapted to another one, and what does need to be looked at in the process of that one. So maybe you want to comment a little bit on that too.
Yeah, well, I think my first learning is that I would like to do the research we've been doing in 5 cities. I would like to do that in 27 cities or 50 cities or whatever, you know, because when, of course, yes, there's globalization, but change goes over time. So, I mean, we can see very clearly that there are some, here in Tokyo, there's some extreme situations for good, I think, when it comes to traffic, but actually for bad when it comes to some of the other issues. And those kind of differences in Sao Paulo, it's the same thing. I mean, just like in Japan, people in Sao Paulo think that, you know, care is an issue, but they really want services in that area, for example, or in communication with authorities. So different cities really do have different opportunities in all of this. And that's a very important takeaway. I would like to go together with Cecilia to Jakarta and continue our research as well, actually. That's my thing.
So here I would like to see if there are any questions or thought from you in the room too, given that this was a discussion around where we heard 34 different countries in the room, right? If there are any thoughts or questions from your different perspectives.
If you look at the cities, for instance, Jakarta on one side, and let's take a city like Amsterdam on the other side, where in Holland the population is declining instead of growing, and the demand is completely different. What is in common?
I think if you look even to Sweden, I mean, we have a situation where we have, we're coming maybe to the problem, but from very different directions. So, for example, here in Japan, we heard about the single household, right? We do have that same situation in Sweden. There's a lot of single households in our country. However, we don't have the density problem. There is a lot of space in Sweden. But looking at some of the ideas for how you can create a community feeling with single household together can still be applied, but in different ways. I don't know if you think about it from an Amsterdam perspective, if you look at these different parameters too, if you see that there could be some learnings to do.
What you see in Holland, and I think that you can also, if you look at the situation when Israel that was founded a couple of years ago, yet also that's other kind of communities where people were living together. And the reason behind it is that with shared resources it's easier to survive. But once people get more educated, earn more money, are richer, they want to have privacy. And in fact, that's the opposite of creating communities. They did the same in Russia with the kolkhozes. Once people getting rich, they don't want to live in communities.
And of course, you're right, not all the findings can be applied directly to all the other countries. In the example of Indonesia, I found it very interesting to see that they were not looking for the bigger house or the bigger privacy. They were looking for the joint courtyard. So again, understand the local conditions and then see if learnings can be applied from the global insights.
Could I add one thing about what's in common? Actually, when we looked at satisfaction drivers across 27 cities, there are differences, but the commonalities are bigger than the differences. So when I asked you in this room about, for example, what causes most stress or what's the highest dissatisfaction, you picked that up, and also with the satisfaction drivers, you picked that up. I was joking. I mean, we wasted all this money, and you already know this, because there are actually very many commonalities across cities. The thing is that the solution differs.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? So then to round this, yes, we have one here.
I've asked this question personally, but if you may elaborate a bit more, if you have generational slices on the different demands, because younger generation would like to have different applications or services than the older generation. Do you see or could you experience those kinds of differences? Thank you.
Didn't fit a few, right?
Yeah, I think again, I mean, obviously, I mean, when we, when you do a project and look into all of these issues, there's so many things you can pick up. So definitely there are generational issues. One of the things that we see specifically, if we ask anything about a service, is actually that young people are more interested in the service, and some of the times you actually wonder why are they interested in this service, because it doesn't really apply to them. So that's one area where you actually see that there's younger people are more open to thinking about services actually overall. We still have this sort of, if you were born into the internet, if you don't know anything about life outside of the internet, then you are more open, generally speaking, to any kind of service. Of course, then the other dimension is the need. So we picked out today the discussion about how young couples with children are more interested in care services because there's a need correlation. If we look into the traffic situation, the people who are more in traffic situations, they have a bigger need, and you see two different strands there. People who are driving their own cars have certain characteristics, and there tend to be slightly different people than the people who go on public transport. For example, the younger people don't have driver's licenses themselves. So you see a lot of generational differences. But it's very much connected to your experience about different things and your need for different things.
And we can see that across the different services too.
Yes.
There was a question over here. Yeah. Okay.
My name is Jeff Mucci with RCR, and in the House Vision Project and in your study, did you get a lot of input from policy officials? Because I think at the end of the day, the government is going to be the group that has to pick up the cost for investing in the housing for the future. In the U.S., we have 80 million baby boomers. Not all of them are going to be able to afford senior housing, right? So the burden of housing is going to fall on the government and taxpayers. I assume in other socialized countries and other countries the same will hold true.
Yeah.
So as you did your studies, you look out 5, 10, 15, 20 years, did you talk to policymakers about who's going to fund this new type of housing?
Yeah, we did. This is the first piece we did in this area, the City Life study, which spanned a number of different cities, and then we did another one. And in Ericsson, we have a lot of visits from governments to our headquarters. And every time we discuss these topics, it's of really high interest, of course, to them. So we do have such a discussion ongoing in different countries where we work. And also as a company, we have to think about You know, how can we do something to also help the country where Ericsson is to flourish? So that's also a discussion we are taking.
Well, particularly in the context of reducing overall health care.
Right.
In the context of reducing overall health care costs. You know, if you do have these communities and you build the housing, will it drive down overall cost of health care?
Yes, I think potentially it could. That's one of the discussions we're having also in the US, for example, with different demos and so on. Yeah. Okay, good. I think it's time to round off the day a little bit. And I would just like to thank all of you for your active contribution during the discussions, the questions, the panels, and so on. And the discussion keeps going on, because what will happen now is that we will have time for mingling, and we will have 2 more days together.